Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. And now set correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're in class with us. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. Rich Sheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. Welcome, Rich Sheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli, and good morning, America. How are you doing today?
You know, Rich, I got one of those calls this morning that no one wants to make and no one wants to receive. Brandy Brogdon, USA Prepares instructor, called the farmhouse and she was in tears, absolutely in tears. And she gave Mrs. Finelli and me the very, very sad news that one of our instructors passed away, Jim Stewart. Jim Stewart was, I believe, in his 80s. He's bunked with us when we traveled, and presented seminars. He was a close friend of Dr. Joel Wallach, Brandy Brogdon, myself, and he will sorely be missed. And he was degreed in the sciences at the University of Missouri, and he took same classes by the same instructors as Dr. Joel Wallach. And animal nutrition, human nutrition were both passions of his. He will sorely, sorely be missed. So if you had called to sign up and discuss longevity with USA Prepares, you might have spoken with Jim Stewart. If you came to the booth at the expo, the longevity booth, you probably met him, and he will sorely, sorely be missed. Sad note. Rich Sheben, you and I were talking yesterday about you work all your life, and then what? And just a little bit more about Jim Stewart. The last few years were pretty tough on him. His wife became very, very ill, and he had to physically separate from his wife. Not legally, not a legal separation, but his wife needed care that was provided by a member of the family, and he needed care that was provided by another member of the family. So they were apart to get care. And his house burned down, and he became homeless while they were rebuilding his house, and I'm not sure it ever got finished. And he lived in Missouri. Very, very sad. So these things happen. You see these burned down houses on the road as you travel every once in a while, and well, one of them was his. Very, very sad. And he'd call up here, call the farmhouse, and he was the master of being brief. He would call Mrs. Finelli and say, "Hey, this is Jim. Can you get this message to Vincent? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. Got it. Thanks very much. See you. Bye." It was that fast. I was very much appreciated that he planned out the calls. He delivered a succinct message. And he'd call many times a week. And he called just a couple days ago, just before he died, probably the day before he died. Very, very sad. Jim Stewart, we will miss you. Rich, what do you have for us today?
Well, you mentioned real quickly a few moments ago. You alluded to what we talked about last night, and you also talked about you were at a wedding not too long ago, and how the couple was talking about having fun and all this stuff. And back in the day, people, before they talked about having fun, might have a house that hasn't been built or some type of outstanding loan or debt, assuming that he was in debt, he could have paid for it with cash. But a lot of young people today, they always talk about traveling and having fun and things like that. And we're in a aristocracy-dominated world where we now have a caste system pretty much all over the world where it's getting more and more difficult to control one's own destiny and gain prosperity for the individual. And I remember you said, well, you mentioned that quickly, so I'm going to do that. I believe you've got to be debt-free before you start having fun. Of course, you need to have a little fun along the way, but the big debt-free is owning your home, paying off your car loan, your school loan, and your credit card. And as you know, we're back in a subprime mortgage and car loan catastrophe scenario, and credit card debt is through the roof, and that's why bankruptcies, defaults, delinquencies, and words like that you're reading about on a hourly basis. But I just wanted to throw that in there, and I'm going to start, Vince, with an article that I'm sure a lot of our audience has already read, and basically it talks about Joe Biden and how he mentions that the people of America, especially the Republican Party, has abandoned American values for phony populism and fake nationalism. And this really, and they talk about one article label it as us being the deplorables again. But before I give some examples about this, I want to just take one or two comments. I'm just going to take the first comment that shows up, and basically it says, Lady Fondler Joe's Democrat Party values include, and this is just astute from an ordinary average Joe American like we are, and I'm just going to read what he says. Supporting for killing babies, abolishing the Second Amendment, censoring the First Amendment, political correctness, giving illegal alien citizenship, giving illegal aliens priority over Americans, identity politics, which, as you know, is group identity politics or victim group status, manufactured racial division, manufactured racism, causing strife between men and women, radical feminism, persecution of white heterosexual males, keeping blacks on the Democrat plantation, obstructing snowflakes at university, feminizing and emasculating men, gender confusion, LGBTQ insanity, child transgenderism, abandoning the middle class, elitism, protecting elites from prosecution, in parentheses, Hillary, destruction of the family unit, anti-Christianity, anti-God, reject God 3 times at 2012 DNC, social justice warriors, Antifa, cultural Marxists, communists, attack and undermine the military, depressed economy, America last, globalism, and then he says President Trump represents American values, the rest in the Democrat Party do not. Now, I'm just going to read the next one. Just really short. My dad, age 82, and a lifelong Democrat, re-registered this year as an independent. He says the Democrats abandoned him and have nothing to do, are nothing but a bunch of lying, transgender, illegal, alien-loving fools. And I can go on and on and on with how people are waking up around America. And I'm going to basically address Joe Biden real quickly with another article taken by the same day, and it's mentioned property taxes spike, shocking homeowners nationwide. See, this is what's happening in America. The mainstream media and the courts, the lawyers, the judges, the bankers, the politicians, are all bought and paid for. And what's happening, I've been reading quite a few articles on this, and those of you who are regular listeners know that I've been dealing with the Montana Department of Revenue regarding the valuation of my log cabin, which has no traditional running water, no interior pipes, no hot water heater, no pressure tank, no modern heat, no finished bathroom, which they said I had 2 finished bathrooms. I flushed my toilet with a bucket of water. And that's how I live, and I have no complaints. I'm not complaining about it one bit, but it does change your evaluation when you don't have running water in your home, especially hot water tank, pressure tank, and interior pipes. They even said I had 2 finished bathrooms. See, this is what's happening, Joe Biden, is that I'm reading so many articles where the powers that be, their pensions are in the red for government workers. So the government, through greed and pension fluffing, is attacking the people who are just trying to get by, just trying to survive. And you call it populism and nationalism. It's survivalism, Joe. And basically, the DNC are proponents of these behaviors. And we are heading into a stagflationary, deflationary environment, especially for the bottom 93%, where they're about to lose anything. The only thing that I think is going to hold value is acreage. And that's where a lot of the smart money is going, is to buying acreage so people can grow a garden, raise animals, have privacy, live off-grid, and control some of their own destiny. I see urban suburban properties dropping dramatically. I see box stores, retail in general, commercial dropping rapidly. We have a pretty good chance of not just being in a recession, which we are now for the bottom 93%, by the way, but I see a 50% chance of a very bad depression coming. Now, when I re-invited the appraiser into my home, he was talking about another off-grid community. Hey, properties sell, and I go, I know, but this is not an off-grid community. Life is relative. When you have other choices, most people and most women are going to choose running water. That's just the way it is. But he tried to be belligerent and take over the conversation of my property. His name is Dan LePen out of Kalispell, Montana. And he even admitted to me over the phone, as well as his colleagues, that he said I was reevaluated as with 2 finished bathrooms and a finished basement, which is not the case. So basically, when I commented on that, he said, well, that's your opinion. No, that's an objective fact. And I'll go into more detail and specificity after the break, Vince.
Rich Sheben's with us, and what we're hearing is the tip of the iceberg about a huge scandal. Rich Sheben's with us. Class, if you want to learn a little bit more about Jumpin' Joe Biden, you can go to your favorite search engine, type in Joe Biden, plagiarism. Learn a little bit more about Joe Biden. And just another example of who has been selected to lead this country. Jumpin' Joe Biden. They used to call him Jumpin' Joe Biden because he would switch sides of a vote. I probably, this is my imagination running wild, probably depending on who either threatened him more or bribed him more. Yeah, Jumpin' Joe Biden. That's what he was called. And Rich, you're talking about a scandal. And it's huge. It's huge. And it's affected you, me, our family. Len Pence, another one of our instructors, and I'll weigh in a little bit later about what happened to me and what happened to Len Pence with this overtaxation where it was not warranted. Absolutely fallacious taxation. Fraud committed by the state. Fraud committed by the state. And what happens? So your tax assessor, a real nice guy, right? Or a real nice gal. No. They're on the other team. They want what you have. They want to reach into your wallet, demand at the point of a gun, the muzzle of a gun, your wealth. And when I say wealth, I'm not necessarily talking about being rich beyond belief. I'm talking about whatever you have, whatever you've accumulated, we'll call that wealth, and they want a chunk of it. These guys are parasites, and they feed on we, the villagers. Rich, tell us the rest of the story.
Yeah, Vince, it's unbelievable. It never ends. And people, this is what fascism is. This is when the big corporate oligarchies and big government are in bed together, and they create an alliance. And they own the mainstream media. They own the courts. They own the judges. They own the bankers. They own the lawyers who have sold America out. Basically, it's a takeover to reinforce the few on the aristocracy controlling the serfs. And that's why you always hear me say it. Don't pay attention so much to the left-right paradigm. It really is a false paradigm. And we're heading towards a very bad place that's unsustainable with headwinds that's going to deter future rates of growth for probably 20 years. And that's because of demographics, debt, credit, pensions, valuations, government promises, central bank corrupt monetary policies, Keynesian economics, group identity politics. The game is rigged. And if you have been listening to the show for a while, you know I've talked about each one of those in great specificity and detail. But solvency and liquidity is going to be a main issue for the bottom 93%, especially with the advent of robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, and the technocracy taking millions of jobs and only giving very few those particular jobs. Now, when I talked to Dawn Cardone, who's the supervisor of Kalispell and Libby, I told her, because when the appraiser came in, this Dan guy, I told him that I would volunteer to give an economic one-on-one talk to the Montana Department of Revenue. I would volunteer in my time and my dime, because I was talking about stagflation. I was talking about deflation. I was talking about some of the statistics, how 40% of Americans can't come up with $500, 50% can't come up with $1,000, 69% don't have $1,000 in savings, 78% live paycheck to paycheck, and how quantitative easing, 95% of that money goes to the top 1 to 7%, mostly the top 1 to 2%, from the taxpayers on the bottom 93% of the bottom of the totem pole. It's all aristocracy and hierarchy made, from wars to central bank corrupt monetary policies, the whole works. So anyway, I volunteered to give an economic one-on-one talk. When I was talking about these statistics and some economic terms, the Department of Revenue had no idea what I was talking about. None. So in Montana, if you have an unfinished home, like, for example, even outside the home, if you have Tyvek and you don't have siding, you get a huge tax break. They couldn't figure this out. And I'll go into more detail.
Let's talk about that. Tyvek. That's like breathable wrapping around your house that goes underneath the siding. We'll be right back. Kurt Sheben's with us. You mentioned Tyvek. That's a DuPont registered trademark, and it's a brand of this polyethylene fiber. It's spun, and it's like a fabric, if you will. You've seen it on buildings. Sometimes it says Tyvek. Sometimes it has other names, like the names of building material supply companies like Lowe's and Home Depot and names like that. You can cut it with with scissors. It's hard to tear. It sheds water. Water doesn't go through it very well, if at all, but moisture will go through it. So it's a barrier to prevent water from damaging the building during construction and after construction. It stays on the building, and it goes underneath. If you have vinyl siding, it goes underneath the vinyl siding. If you have wood siding, it goes underneath that. If you have brick, it goes under that. If you have stone, it goes under that. If you build your building well. And I highly recommend that you use a material like that as a vapor barrier and a wind barrier. And also it prevents air leaks. So on those cold days when the wind wants to blow through into your house, it prevents that from happening. So Rich, please continue. You're talking about Tyvek on the building, and the government employees have no idea the kinds of things that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and basically to put an exclamation point on what you just said, Vince, if it's an unfinished home, you get taxed at a very small percentage, and I use Tyvek as an example. But you can also use running water, no hot water heater, no interior pipes, no pressure tank, no modern heat, no finished bathrooms, because they even admitted to me that they said I had 2 finished bathrooms in the finished basement. So I made sure I took them to my quote-unquote bathroom. I said, please flush the toilet. He goes, no, I believe it. So anyway, the supervisor, Dawn Cardone, says, during these months of dealing with this issue of fraud, of government fraud, she said to me, Rich, I know you hate government. I stopped her right there. I said, no, I don't hate government. I hate corrupt government. No one I know hates government. We want transparent government, non-manipulative government, non-deceptive, accountable government, not overreaching, overspending, foreign-owned, foreign-run government, not government that takes advantage of the little guy. She said nothing. So there's no benevolence in every measure, unit of measure, and every echelon of government, from the federal government to the state government and county government, Joe Biden. So it's not that us deplorables and irredeemables are populists. We're trying to survive because of the corruption from your departments who are trying to feather your own nest to create pension funds and much higher wages than the private sector gets, much higher benefits than the private sector gets, and much higher pensions than the private sector gets. And this is one of the reasons why we have to combine government pensions from Social Security to government pensions in average amount throughout society because of the corruption from people like here in the Montana Department of Revenue who have no accountability for their behaviors. And basically what they are is unelected agencies with so-called official authorities. And Americans need to take America back, or else we're going to be in a situation, and I'm going to dovetail into this real quickly. If you look at the EU, all unelected officials, and I'm going to read an article here real quick. The forced collapse of the Italian populist government sent European stocks in Europe, euro plunging downward Monday. President Mattarella said the surprise announcement Sunday he would refuse to appoint Paolo Savona as economics minister, defying the Italian electorate that had been elected a coalition of populist and anti-establishment parties to the Italian parliament. And then I can keep moving on and on and on. Britain has failed. The journalists, and I'm trying to get this to pop up here, basically independent journalists who are like Tommy Robinson, who are just trying to monitor some of the pedophile cases that's going on, has now been arrested without due process. This is what's happening in America, folks. This is where America has gone. And we're probably 5 years, could be 10 years behind Europe. There's no burden of proof. It all depends on what group you're on. We have no savings. We have higher debt, less credit is collapsing. Our freedoms are collapsing. We have more bureaucracy, violence, and brainwashing. I'm sure most of you have read recently that antidepressants are linked to dementia. Now, do you think doctors and pharmaceutical companies are going to be liable? No, because they are part of the protectionist system. Even antibiotics in meat are linked to gut destruction. This has been coming out recently over the past couple of weeks. Here we go. Britain has fallen. Journalists failed. Okay. My computer's really running slow, folks. But anyway, it was an article about Tommy Robinson, who was basically trying to do everything in his power to tell the people what's happening with pedophile networks who are being protected. And I even have an article here, too, and if my computer comes back up, which is a coincidence, I think that you'll be able to see that everything is fake and phony, and that's why fake news is so prevalent, because I even have an article that is not up right now because my computer's going down, but basically says that there was a picture of caged children regarding immigration issues, and all the so-called leftists were blaming Trump. Well, this was a picture from the Obama administration of caged children. And Vince, I don't know if you read that, but everything's propaganda, everything's lies, everything's false flags, and that's the way everything is going today.
Yeah, Rick Miller said that years and years ago, and I don't think very many of those who might have been paying attention, I'm not talking about our class, but people didn't believe it when he said it's all a lie. Nothing's true. And what he was trying to say is the media is corrupt, the media is lying, the media is trying to convince us to believe certain things that aren't true. Rich, you said a couple things. I'd like to make a couple quick comments. I got a call from Gwyneth Isaacs in Australia yesterday, and she said, Vincent, she was talking about Tommy Robinson. She said this guy was investigating, trying to monitor and expose these pedophile rings. He was arrested, and now he's in jail, and he's looking at, well, he's facing 13 months in jail, or in prison. And this morning, I was checking email, and Gwyneth Isaacs has produced a T-shirt, Free Tommy Robinson. And on the back, it has that quote that you might remember from Benjamin Franklin, that if we don't hang together, we will hang separately. I'm just paraphrasing that quote, and that's on the back of the T-shirt. So Gwyneth Isaacs has taken this as something that she's very concerned about, and she's doing something about it. And Gwyneth, thank you so much, and she'll be on with us tomorrow telling us more about what she's done. You mentioned
Congratulations, Gwyneth. That's absolutely what needs to be done. We need to stick together. And Vince, I just popped up the article. Let me just mention it real quick because I kind of paraphrase it. Britain has fallen journalist jailed for covering sex trafficking trial. It's a crime to report on certain events in Great Britain, but one defiant journalist ignored the court. There's gag orders by the judge that has been created. Unbelievable. Here you have a hero, Tommy Robinson, being arrested and thrown into prison for 13 months, no burden of proof, no due process. And this is very worrying, and this is what the EU does. The EU is their unelected officials trying to control the narrative and everything else. Keep in mind, folks, when they were talking about banning cash in their draft legislation, in small print, they said that the people have no right to privacy and anonymity and does not constitute a fundamental human right. So basically, the powers that be are feathering their own nest and feathering their addiction to power, money, and control, where the people will not have any rights. So for you people in the UK especially, or across Europe, you need to get Tommy Robinson out of prison. And for you police officers that have arrested him, you have to stand for principle. Vince, as you know, I stick up for the police officers around the world a lot. But when you start to cater to the elite just for your own paycheck and pension and benefit package, and you no longer follow the law, where due process is no longer an issue because power has corrupted the system so bad, somebody in the police department needs to do something. You need to stand for principle. Just because the hierarchy tells you to shut up and not do anything, that doesn't mean it's going to be right. We have to have the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody. And it's not aristocracy controlling the serf, because that's what it is. And pardon my interruption, Vince, but please continue.
Well, it just goes on and on and on. Everything you said triggered new thoughts. Well, here's one. So I got a call several years ago from the city of Lebanon. This gal called me up, and she said, Mr. Finelli, and I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm calling because, and I'm paraphrasing, you're delinquent in paying your Lebanon city tax, your merchant tax, in order to sell in Lebanon. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not delinquent. I don't sell anything in the city of Lebanon. You're assuming that I'm selling something in Lebanon. You're assuming that I'm exhibiting and having an event in Lebanon. I am not. And I will not pay a tax because I don't owe the tax. And I said, who's your boss? And why is your boss so timid that he's having you call me and take the response that I'm giving you when you call me demanding that I pay something that I don't know? Why don't you tell your boss to get on the phone and talk to me? Maybe take them out of his pocket or grow a set and give me a call and stop having you make these calls. How about that? We'll be right back. So the City of Lebanon, Missouri Corporation does what a lot of corporations do. They hire people, they pay them small wages, and they make them do the dirty work. Like call people like me and harass people like me, demanding that we pay taxes that are not due. that are not legitimate. They're trying to force us to pay for things that we don't owe. And so the city of Lebanon assumed that I was doing business in the city of Lebanon. And why would I do that? It's a corrupt corporation. Why would I want to do business with them? So they assumed that I didn't pay my taxes, and they assumed that I was transacting business on grounds that they called their corporate grounds, the City of Lebanon Corporation. And I wasn't. And I hadn't been. And I'm not going to. And so they tried to force me to pay taxes for their privilege of conducting commerce in their territory, which I hadn't done. And they can't prove that I did because I haven't. So they have this gal call up because the boss is too timid, too afraid to call people and demand that they pay bills that aren't due. So they have the little people do it. Now, it's not just these young ladies. They have guys doing it too. They give them uniforms and guns and tasers and shotguns, handcuffs and cars and vans and SUVs and paddy wagons and jail cells. And then they have a guy in a black dress who oversees the whole charade. They're all involved in the same criminal activity. All of them. They're all paid by the same funds. So, class, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I am not going to pay taxes that I don't know. I am not going to do it. And when the state of Missouri came after me and my family and demanded that we pay $35,000 plus $65,000, for 1 year it was $35,000. The next year, $65,000 in unpaid sales taxes. They demanded that we pay. They assumed that we owed it. They couldn't prove it because it wasn't true. There was no sales tax owed. None. They threatened us. They threatened us again. They threatened us again. They demanded our emails for years. Said, no, we're not giving them to you. They demanded sales records. I said, no. I said, you prove your case. You prove we owe it. I'm not proving I'm innocent. You prove I'm guilty. And they couldn't do it because I am innocent. But I wasn't going to give them anything more than I absolutely had to. I was not going to make their life any easier. Because why? They were threatening me and my family. Am I the only one? No. Len Pence, they did the same thing to him. They claimed that he owed around $3,000 in unpaid sales taxes. How do I know? He told me. Before he died, he told me that they were coming after him for unpaid sales taxes. And what they did was they sent him the same kind of letter that they sent us. Here's how much you owe in unpaid sales taxes, and here's the penalties, and here's the interest. Here's what you owe us. And he told me, he said, Vinny, I have a business that teaches people how to garden. They are claiming that I owe them for the last 3 months of 2017. The last 3 months. That's the winter. He said, October, November, December, we don't teach classes in the winter. And by the way, teaching classes is not taxable. Education is not taxable in Missouri. Hardly anywhere. I don't know of any place where education is taxable. Have you paid taxes to the university or to the college or the community college? No, because it's not taxable. So they were claiming that he owed money for unpaid taxes that he didn't owe. And what did they do? They put a lien on his farm. So they've done it to Rich Scheben, not the lien, but they came after him for taxes that were not due. They fabricated it. It's fraud. They did the same thing to my family and to Len Pence. There's 3 cases right there. Corrupt government. And I've got to know, why do they think Rich Scheben? Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Scheben is with us. And class, you've heard some of the commercial announcements here on GCN. One of them starts out, this is Fred. Well, the guy who does that, his name is Ron Allen. And if you notice that same voice is the announcer for USA Prepares. And on Friday, we're going to do something kind of fun. We're going to do the anatomy of a radio advertisement. We're going to talk about how they're created, why they sound the way they do, which ones work, which ones don't work. So if you're thinking about starting a business, which I recommend you do, and if that business involves advertising, you might want to pay attention in class to Ron Allen, his company, The Big Voice, and it is a big voice. And I'll tell you, how we did that particular radio lead in, lead out, sometimes called a rejoiner, sometimes it's called an intro, an outro, and we'll talk a little bit about that on Friday. So, Rich Scheben, we're talking about fraud. We're talking about government-perpetrated fraud. We're talking about how the county governments are running short on revenue because of the pensions that have been negotiated, and how the government's corporations are looking everywhere they can to obtain revenue to fund their poor decisions. And
absolutely. And when you look at the paychecks and the benefit package and the pensions from government sector workers compared to the private sector, it's got to be a 10-to-1 ratio. When you look at, I always like to talk about economic updates here and there throughout the programs, but I've recently read that the percentage of households with more debt than savings is higher now than at any point since 1962. And basically, there's no protection, there's no restitution under the rule of law for the little guy, because there is no rule of law. Everything's propaganda, lies, false flags. A great example is, a few weeks ago, I'm sure some of you who listen to this show have seen this in the new media, and that was an interview to Democrats, and I'm paraphrasing here, and the interviewer was saying how these are all Bernie's policies. What do you think about this, and he was running through all these different policies, and all the Democrats loved it. Well, at the very end, the truth had turned out to be that these were all Trump policies. And this tells me a few things. This tells me that the people are uninformed, and the people think that the Democrat Progressive Party is liberal. It's not. Follow every penny that comes to the Democrat Party. The money that goes to Antifa, to Black Lives Matter, basically it's from the UN, the Soroses, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. Follow the money. That's where it's going. And speaking of money, I can guarantee you, with Tommy Robinson being locked up in prison with no due process, where murderers and rapists and other criminals get due process, Tommy Robinson's not getting it. Not to mention the fact that Italy, the elected officials are now being ignored, and EU in general is non-elected. And as I mentioned to you earlier regarding the confiscation of cash in their draft legislation in small print, the EU says privacy and anonymity does not constitute a fundamental human right for the people. So I expect a lot of people, I think the dollar is going to get stronger, because I think the smart money is going to come out of the euro dollar. And I think things are going to turn around for the dollar. I think the dollar is going to get much stronger because the EU is obviously an aristocracy management for the serfs. And this is why I always talk about, folks, don't get fooled with the left-right paradigm. If it's socialism, communism, tyrannical, dictatorships, fascism, anything that's centralized control from the top down with no accountability for the governing body, it's going to be a disaster for the people. And look what's been happening here in America with, the billionaires' personal gain, their campaign contributions, lobbyists, special interests, PACs, government grants. Everything supersedes free market and supply and demand. Pork barrel spending, police state being militarized with your tax dollars. The FBI, CIA, NSA, Department of Justice, they're owned by the highest bidder. Too big antitrust monopolies, too big to fail, too big to jail, big corporate America. Google, Facebook, Twitter, basically controlling everything. And you probably have also read, Vince, I don't know if you heard about the court ruling about a week ago where President Trump can't block users from responding to Twitter feed. Well, that means there should be a precedent also that Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube can no longer shadow ban conservative commentators. See, it's all one-sided, and that's called tyranny. That's called communism. This is out of old USSR, Russia, and Hitler, Germany activities. Get rid of the guns. Get rid of the free speech. Get rid of controlling your own destiny. That's what is happening. That's why I read that article about Joe Biden when he called the American people deplorables and fake nationalism and populism. It's not. It's survivalism, because things have become so corrupt, so manipulated, so deceptive, so much nepotism that the people can't survive. There's no savings. You know, mortgage refinance has dropped to an 18-year low because of just a little bit of rate increases that we've had. The American people are broke. They're broke. The last recession should have happened 9 years ago, but it didn't because it was postponed by government intervention, stealing from the little guy. I can't say this enough. 95% of quantitative easing, or QE, goes to the top 1 to 7%, mostly the top 1 to 2%. This is why they're talking about this. Everybody gets this income, universal basic income, because the elites have had it given to them from the taxpayers, from the bottom 93%, for the last 20 years, in the form of corporate welfare, government welfare, which I give examples of every time. And they talk about the word entitlements, and they don't have the money. Do you know how many times Congress has tapped the Social Security funds over the past 20, 30 years? Thousands of times. And they're talking about Social Security going broke when Congress votes themselves a pension of full 100% pay after one term. People, we need to wake up, we need to read up, we need to speak up, and we need to stick together, because the powers that be are dividing us, distracting us, and dumbing us down. And they're dividing us by race, gender, sex, religion, ideology, and even generation versus generation. We have to recognize this, and we can't allow the bars of standards and expectations to be so low. And I should do a show just on this, Vince, sometime, and give examples on how lowering the bars of standards and expectations for a job and keeping a job has been the catalyst, the cancer that's metastasized through America for lowering the bars of standards and expectations for everything, every cultural tradition and heritage that made America great. And this is why I blame group identity politics as one of the leading causes, along with Keynesian economics, central bank corrupt monetary policies, and the demographic situation that we have, as being the fall of America. I promise you, people, whatever they decide to do, print more money, QE, everything is going to affect the little guy in the form of delinquencies, in the form of bankruptcies, in the form of cost shifting, in the form of defaults. The little guy is going to lose a lot of ground with what's coming. And this is why Vince and I always talk about buying a piece of land and working the land. Raise your own animals, create your own alternative energy, grow your own garden, etc. We need to dovetail 19th century skills with 21st century technology. People talk about, well, we need robotics, automation, artificial intelligence to be our new industrial leaders. I don't disagree with that. I disagree with it when it affects censorship and surveillance and privacy and the military-industrial complex and the police state against the people. But I'm not against technology increasing. But the little people don't have the choice. We have to dovetail 19th century technology and those skills with 21st century technology, or else there will be no hope. Because if we head into a depression, it's going to be absolutely ugly, and the little guy has no representation, no protection, and no restitution under the law. And we're seeing it tenfold in Europe, and it's going to happen here unless we don't wake up. Vince?
Yeah, Rich, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, the lowering the bars and standards. And, class, if you think about when you've been in a business situation, or if you've been employed in a business situation, and there are a couple secretaries there, and one of them is frantically working, really busy, and the other one is, bored. Why is that? Well, work tends to gravitate toward the competent. So the gal who's really, really busy is competent. The one who is filing her nails, looking at Facebook, looking at the home shopping network on her computer screen is less competent or incompetent. Okay? That's the way it works. And so we got a call during the commercial break here at the farmhouse. And there's a guy who has a truck, and his air conditioning doesn't work. It just quit. He's having all kinds of electrical problems. All kinds of weird things are happening. His dashboard illumination is not working right. The display doesn't tell him the right information. He can't tell what gear he's in. He can't tell how many miles he's gone. A lot of things aren't working, including the air conditioning. Now, did he call our farmhouse because did he say, hey, yeah, I know y'all don't know anything about air conditioning, but, I thought I'd call and bring my truck over there. You think that's why I called? No. He called because he thinks we can do it. Work tends to gravitate toward the competent, and the bars and standards are being lowered, and there's less and less. It can't happen here, that's for sure, right? It can't happen here. Well, I got to tell you, it can happen here. It happened during World War II. It happened in 1973 and 1974. It's happening in Brazil right now. What am I talking about? Gasoline. Gasoline shortages. So during World War II, you had to have ration coupons to get gasoline. How do I know? My parents told me. How do they know? Because they had to live under rationing. So during World War II in the United States, if you wanted meat, if you wanted sugar, if you wanted necessities of life, including gasoline, it was all rationed, and you had a ration coupon booklet. Okay? That's how it worked. In 1973 and 1974, we had the Arab oil embargo. Gasoline was in short supply in the United States, and there was rationing. It's called odd-even rationing. And heck, all of us villagers had fuel rationed. Now, doctors didn't, and government employees didn't, and I'm sure that those in Washington doing the nation's most important work, they didn't have the rationing. Okay? Well, in Brazil, right now, there's a trucker strike. Why? Because, well, the state's gas refinery held prices artificially low. And they decided that, well, the state, Brazil, decided that Petrobras should no longer keep prices artificially low. And let's just join the rest of the world and let the market determine prices. So the prices escalated, and the truckers were furious. They could not survive with the new higher fuel prices. So they went on strike. The truckers went on strike, and they just stopped delivering. Well, what's happening in Brazil? And the reason I'm telling you this is it can happen here. So truckers got together, and they stopped delivering. What? Everything. Fuel, food. So right now, protesters are blocking traffic on hundreds of highways. Uber drivers have joined in. Okay, trucks are parked all over. And what has it affected? Well, of course, fuel. Okay? It's affected fuel. Supermarkets are now rationing fruit. Gas stations are running dry. Airports had run out of fuel already. Okay? This is what happens. And water. Water is a problem because, of course, water uses, fuel is used in the production of clean water. So, big problems, right? Big problems everywhere. How is fuel used? Well, chlorine is delivered by trucks to the water treatment plants to disinfect and kill the pathogens in the water. So, water is in short supply, fuel's in short supply, food's in short supply. Everything is in short supply. And gasoline prices have skyrocketed. So could it happen here? Of course. Has it happened here? Of course. Not for the same reason. Other reasons. But we have had fuel rationing. Now, what would that do to your lifestyle? Would you be able to get to work? Probably not, right? It'd be difficult. you'd have to carpool. And that's what we did back in the 70s. We would carpool because, and whose car would we be in? The smallest one. Why? Because it used less fuel. We would pack in there like sardines, and we'd ride bicycles to meet, to get into the car. I mean, it was a different world because gasoline was in short supply. So we teach a class here on preparedness, and we're trying to tell you, you've got to be prepared for what? Everything. Everything. You know, there was there was a town that lost power on Memorial Day in Ohio. And there's an amusement park. And they had some rides. And they were powered by electricity. So the ride stopped. Now, that's not so bad if you're in line waiting to get on one of these rides. But let's say you are one of the guys that has already gotten on board the roller coaster. And you're climbing that steep ascent to the highest part of the roller coaster. You're on your way up. Click, 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 click. And the power stops. And there you sit. Now how do you get down? No problem. Just wait for the power to come back on, right? It's crazy to subject yourself to those kinds of dangers. Absolutely crazy in my mind. I'm not going to any of those rides.
World has eliminated supply and demand, free markets, because of things like crony capitalism. So I want to talk about oil real quickly. And, oil should really be about $30 a barrel. I think I touched on this a few weeks ago, but I'll do it again. It just shows how everything is fraudulently controlled by a few people at the very top. Because Saudi Arabia has been artificially raising prices so they can sell an IPO that they're trying to unload. Because Saudi wants to go, and OPEC, they want to go towards high technology and get away from oil. So anyway, OPEC and Russia has also been holding back supply, which obviously affects the price of oil, and that's why it's gone up. But recently, we all know it's gone down. But what really also drove the price up is because of speculative investors raising prices. More rigs producing more oil, and more oversupply means less demand, cheaper prices. So we also have a fracking technology that's not just in oil, but with natural gas. And not only does America have this technology, now the rest of the world is picking that up. So I want to say that from my research, America has enough natural gas to fill every vehicle for $1 per gallon. That's how much natural gas we have. So that's why I say oil should not be, if we had true supply and demand, true free markets, and true capitalism, oil would be about $30 a barrel right now. And we have all these zombie companies out there. I just looked at the stock market. It was down like 270 points, down 292 right now, over 1% on the Dow, almost 1% on the S&P, and 0.31% on the NASDAQ, and even gold is down as well. So, and oil's down almost 2%, and I really feel that oil should be coming down because of the fact that a lot of these issues, like I mentioned, is coming to the forefront. People are waking up. People are reading more. And this is what's happening. So anyway, what we can talk about is the fact that I want to talk about economic updates, as I always do, the economy. I really, really hope that most people realize that the left-right paradigm is absolutely false and phony, and that Trump inherited sabotage and demolition. This is a status quo to create an incognito caste system, not a left-right paradigm. The debt is not just American household. It's global, it's corporate, it's government promises, and this is why we always talk about preparing, because it's so important. Because all that money, when you look at the tax benefits, okay, unfortunately government spending increased and gas price increased, so the people aren't really seeing much of a net prosperity in their wallets or their pockets. But look at the tax benefits that happen from corporate America, which I agree with, 35% to 21%. Now, what should have happened, there should have been stipulations for the people regarding the global or the American corporate tax relief. And what I mean by that is the money should have went to research and development, to employees, to the people, to goods and services. But what they're doing is manufacturing inflation by taking all that money savings from the tax write-offs and giving it to the super wealthy inside the system. For example, the stock buybacks. All that money is going to, or a lot of it's going to stock buybacks for the purpose of increasing the dividends for the people, because as the stock buybacks occur, the price of the shares go up artificially, not through supply and demand of free markets. And that money goes to the super wealthy who own the preferred stocks. 1% of the people own 83% of the stocks, 96 or 10% of the people own 96% of the stocks. So it's not helping the little people at all, which again is the bottom 93% of Americans. And then when stock prices go up because of stock buybacks, the CEOs, the CFOs, the executives of these specific companies make money by cashing in their stock options. And other of those monies go to mergers and acquisitions, which is basically consolidation, which affects the little people in the form of basically people being fired and their jobs being switched over to robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. So this is one of the reasons me and Vince always talks about buying a little piece of land to control your own destiny, to grow your own food, raise your own animals. And nature is healing. Nature is fun. There's so many benefits in owning rural land versus living in the cookie-cutter follower, politically correct subdivision mentality, if you will. When you look at the covenants and the homeowners associations where you can't cut trees, you can't have roosters, sometimes you can't have chickens, you can't have a fire pit, you got to paint your house certain colors. You got to really ask yourself, are those increased property taxes that you're getting decreasing the value of your home and making it harder to sell? And I really am a big proponent of getting a variety of topography. And what I mean by that, regarding the type of land, is don't just buy old pasture that's flat, no trees, no character, because you're not going to get much bang for your buck, especially in the realm of privacy. I'm a big proponent of ridges, draws, northern slopes, southern slopes, edible and medicinal plants, wildlife, all the natural resources that you can have, from trees to surface water to a good aquifer underneath your land, rocks, gravel. You could, even if you don't have a flat piece of property, it's very easy to, with a bulldozer or a backhoe, to knock out a building site that you can make flat for a cabin or a barn or a carport or whatever. But even a garden, I've seen some beautiful gardens that are tiered on southern slopes, and they turn out to be beautiful, especially on the top of a southern slope. So when you have an early frost or a late frost, you want to keep your garden going, that cold air literally goes right off of the garden down into the valley floor, and it's a really good way to use usable land. And don't let that usable land terminology from realtors scare you, because some people think usable land is only flat land. That is not the case at all. The more varied topography you have, the more privacy you have, and privacy is a commodity that is not being affordable for the majority of Americans. And that being said, I think when you look at what the elite are doing to the serfs, I think urban and suburban America is going to be too controlled in the very near future, too much crime, and I think that's another reason why people need to start thinking outside the box. We are allowing the elite to poison us against ourselves with information, with lack of freedom and liberty, lack of due process, and we have to see with a little foresight, folks, what's happening in Europe, because what's happening in Europe is going to happen here, because the same people, the globalists who have hijacked the Democrat Party, is going to do the same to all Western nations. And I've mentioned this over the air a few times. I've seen quite a few articles where quite a few of these articles are actually getting purged now, where they're saying that in 10 to 30 years, all Western nations will be under Sharia law. I just want you to think about that. And when you look at what's happening in Europe and how Sharia law is being protected by the elites, it's pretty obvious that they've been hired to be the brown shirts, the black shirts, the mercenaries. And when you have countries who have fought for freedom, we have to ask ourselves, and let's just look at America, for those of you who have fought, especially in combat, and you've had relatives and friends who have fought, lost limbs, lost lives for our freedoms and liberties, do we really want to let those people down? Because over the course of our country, for freedom, we have lost over 1 million combat soldiers. Do we really want to let them down when they have fought for our freedom and liberty? And, you know, we see what's happening with the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the DOJ, and I think what it's doing is waking up the people. But we have to be in a situation that we have ideas and solutions that we can do something about it.
Rich, you talked about privacy. And I think that there are so many people who have so little privacy now, they've given up. They have given up. Now, you've been to the farm here, and you see that, you know, we have what you've talked about. We have the rolling lands. We have a little bit of bottomland. We have a knoll on top of a hill where our house sits so the water doesn't flood us. We have a stream. We have ponds. We have woods. I'm not bragging, class. This took 4 generations to build this farm that the Finellis live on. And you can do it too. You can do it too if you deprive yourself of amusement parks, Starbucks coffees, the latest fashions, the newest cars, overpriced entertainment. If you deprive yourself of those things, you can put those funds toward real property. And if you save and scrimp and you're frugal, you can do it. You absolutely can. And Rich is absolutely right. And if you have the desire to be private, I suggest you consider moving to the country. We'll be right back. We have an exclusive offer here for USA Prepare students and instructors. Dan Sutterfield in Missouri is offering lifetime memberships to Front Sight. They had cost as much as $25,000. Well, for $500, you can get a lifetime membership to Front Sight. Attend all of the classes that you choose for your life, and you can pass this on to a survivor if you'd like. You can call Dan Sutterfield in Missouri, 573-762-2356. 573-762-2356. You know, Rich, we got a message this weekend from one of our family friends who is a teacher on the East Coast. He teaches high school. The text message was, it was not to me, it was to a member of our family, that his 6th student, number 6, had committed suicide. This year. Now, he's in a big public high school. Even so, 6 students in 1 year committing suicide. So, you know, I thought about this. And at the time I received this message from our son, I said, social media. You know, it seems like young people today are dependent on social media. And they say, look at me. Do you like me? Look at me. Look at this. Do you like this? Do you like me? And then someone says, no, I don't like you. And they say, well, I'm going to kill myself. I think that kind of thing happens. How is it possible? I don't know a single student who committed suicide when I was in high school. Not one. And I hadn't heard of anyone before nor after. And I'm looking at just some of the news headlines. Student suicide and depression awareness. Crisis on campus, the untold story of student suicides. UK student suicide rate up by 56% in 10 years. Why are student suicides rising? Universities have suicide problem as students are taking their own lives. These are just headlines. Right? What is going on? It's got to be tied to social media. Students are bullying each other on social media, and the pressure is unbearable. So they're taking their own lives. Look, we didn't used to do that. We would go outside after school and play ball, or we'd find something else to do. We entertained ourselves. No one had to tell us what to do. We didn't have all these organized activities. We weren't programmed. We figured it out on our own. We had hobbies. We had interests. We pursued learning. It was the best years of our country. I'm talking about the 1950s and the 1960s. Today, we don't do that. If you ask a young person, so what's your hobby? What are they going to say? I don't think they have hobbies. If you ask a young person, so how you doing? I'm bored. How can you be bored? How is that possible?
Yeah, Vince, if I may, we got a couple of seconds or minutes left. I agree with everything you're saying. We have a bubble everything, which is creating despair, because we have so much corruption, manipulation, deception, nepotism that's taking over free markets, common sense, logic. There's a war against the American people, especially the bottom 93%, to control them. 80% of the news comes from Google or Facebook. That's despair, because their job is to control the narrative, memes, themes, talking points, microphones, sway public opinion. And only 5 or 6 companies control all this, not just TV, radio, but production companies, publishing companies, the whole works. People have to stand up for truth. People have to read and research and find truth for themselves, because what's coming, folks, is going to be very ugly, economically speaking. And the skill sets, especially for the young people, is looking quite bleak because there's not many of them. Vince?
What came to my mind as you were saying that is how many people would say, boy, if it weren't for Facebook and social media, I'd be bored. Can you imagine? Can you imagine letting these big companies run your lives? How awful. Grandparents, I think it's up to you. I think it's up to you to educate the young people in your lives that social media is not the be-all, end-all.